Hello, my name is John Matthias Kenny Norgard. Today I will be analyzing an excerpt from the book 1984 by the author George Orwell. It is going to be focused on two major characters, Winston and Julia. Winston is a rather childish but rebellious character that is not at all comfortable under the authoritarian future dystopian government, and Julia uses her sexual nature to gain authority in this authoritarian future dystopian government by having sex. So let's read the first line of this excerpt. Their first lovemaking had simply been an act of the will. Now, from this, we can already glean two things. We know that it's third person because it's not your, mine, it's their first lovemaking. And we know it's omniscient because we can know their feelings. It's an act of the will. It's an act of free will. It's an act of love. It's an act of will in general. So we know that it's omniscient. The narrator knows their feelings. And it's also describing a poetic tone because it's not describing petty things like you would potentially get in second person or first person or regular third person, where the author isn't so aware of its characters. We know that what they did was an act of freedom of will and potentially love. And the word there is potentially foreshadowing that this excerpt will detail some of their relationship. So poetry. We know from poetry that it expresses really strong feelings and ideas, generally from an outside perspective, and is given intensity by the use of distinctive style and rhythm. So the style and rhythm is going to be very important of what we look at within the excerpt. Before we move on to this next text, I would like to discuss what we'll go into with this. So I'll now read these lines. But before going into either, I have to address that throughout this we'll be looking at the theme, which I believe is about the 5 stages of grief, and I believe we start here at denial, at this very possessive feeling where we refuse to accept the what others have given us and what obstacles have come our way, and we say, no, these are my feelings, this is how I feel, and you're not included. So if we look at some of the language as we go through this, we're going to see some sort of rough, very roughly hewn imagery and words that sort of reflect this very possessive denial feeling, this sort of anger. And it also personifies our main character, because even though there's this bare understanding of the people and the feelings and obstacles around him, there's not really, because it's sort of as a child is budding and sort of just barely is able to express these things. But it's still very relatable because we can relate it to being a child and to growing up and sort of being pouty and in denial and not really understanding social circumstances. So, but after the second time it was different. The smell of her hair, the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her skin seemed to have got inside him, or into the air all round him. She had become a physical necessity, something that not only wanted, but felt that he had a right to. When she said that she could not come, he had the feeling that she was cheating him. So we see from this that the first line is key, but only because we're being familiarized with Julia now. We're being familiarized with her personality. She's being personified through this powerful imagery, the smell of her hair, the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her skin. It's all things that we can only perceive with our senses, and that's why it's defined by the literary term, the drama of sensibility. And it's really only used in those powerful scenarios where emotions and poetic nature is so important, that these very angry and very loving and passionate moments. She had become a physical necessity, something he had not only wanted, but felt that he had a right to. So again, his childish nature really coming through, his possessive nature really coming through. He is very much in denial that she is important to him, to the extent that she's being made out to be an object and something that he has a right to. When she said that she could not come, he had the feeling that she was cheating him. And now it's very poetic because it's really displaying this sort of loneliness, this powerful emotion of want, and it's a potential wordplay in that she could not come could be in the context of their lovemaking presently. He had the feeling that she was cheating him, as in not giving him what he desired in the moment, or potentially cheating on him, as in the fact that she actually has a lot of sexual activity. So it's very possible that he has activity, he has these sexual feelings, but he also has this powerful longing for her. So already we've moved from this possessiveness and denial, and it may be that we're already in the stage of anger. He feels cheated of something. He feels like he could demand something, and like it's something that he's not getting. And what this really means is that Winston has something that he wants from her, that he wants her to give him. So he understands her position to himself. So already we've moved from just him, just my feelings, just no, she doesn't even exist, from this very narcissistic tone, and now she is something that he desires and wants something from, and isn't just going to necessarily demand, well, he may be demanding, and it may still be a violent or sort of angry text, but he sort of understands that she has something that he wants. And he's potentially aware that even when they're together, that there's something that he's not getting. So even when they're close, there's something that he's not getting from her and could get from her. So we're sort of quickly swaying from the last one, where there was just a little bit of tenderness and a little bit of care and a little bit of he's envy and jealous and desiring of her presence, and a little bit more of a gentle way, just very slightly. And we're moving now into depression, which is another quick phase where we see this sort of tenderness, and it happens very quickly, and in this we'll be able to notice more the proper language and tone that really displays that tenderness. But just at this moment, the crowd pressed them together, and their hands accidentally met. The crowd pressed them together, and they are together. The world pressed them together. They were fated to be pressed together. She gave the tips of his fingers a quick squeeze that seemed to invite not desire, but affection. It struck him that when one lived with a woman, this particular disappointment must be a normal, recurring event, and a deep tenderness, as he had not felt for her before, suddenly took hold of him. So in this passage, we really quickly understand that Winston is passing from this anger, and quickly is now becoming very tender towards her. So he lacks this foundation of his past, and so quickly has he gone from anger to heartfelt understanding, and understanding that this person could cause him harm. This person, just by him wanting her, even if it's possessive, could cause him harm, and that creates this sort of melancholy, this sort of equilibrium, that she's a real person too, and he has to understand her in that sort of way. So now we're moving very quickly again from depression to bargaining. Now, bargaining is really important because while it's still tender and sort of melancholic, there's definitely an equilibrium, and Winston is definitely at odds with the character that he had just moments ago. So not just that, but we're going to see in this text that it almost feels like there's a catharsis to George Orwell being the narrator in this, the omniscient person in this, because he's seeing things from an outside perspective, but he's able to put the author himself at odds with these things, these normal everyday things that he might take for granted. And we see that Winston, these wishes that he has, really taking those all the way out, super appreciative of just, and really wanting these dreams to come true. So, he wished that they were a married couple of 10 years standing. He wished that he were walking through the streets with her just as they were doing now, but openly and without fear, talking of trivialities and buying odds and ends for the household. He wished above all that they had some place where they could be alone together without feeling the obligation to make love every time they met. So, we know now that Winston has passed from denial to anger to depression and finally to bargaining, which means that he's finally reached odds with himself, and the author has finally reached odds with himself, which means that there must be a final turn of the coat in this excerpt, and there will be a powerful change in Winston's character. So I'm going to go really fast here. It was not actually at that moment, but at some time on the following day that the idea of renting Mr. Charrington's room had occurred to him. When he suggested it to Julia, she had agreed with unexpected readiness. Both of them knew that it was lunacy. It was as though they were intentionally stepping nearer to their graves. As he sat waiting on the edge of the bed, he thought again of the cellars of the Ministry of Love. It was curious how that predestined horror moved in and out of one's own consciousness. There it lay, fixed in future time, preceding death as surely as 99 precedes 100. So now we see that their togetherness. They've both been bargaining with themselves and have been accepting their debts as well as the power of the love that they've now had in life. So Winston knows in his mind that he's going to be going to the Ministry of Love. He knows that going to Mr. Charrington's room is a bad idea, and he knows and foreshadows for us that in future he will be returning to room 101, and that is where he'll make his final stand. Now, grief is definitely a theme throughout this excerpt, because in the end, it's not necessarily that he has accepted his grief or even accepted his life, but he's accepted his death. And I suppose in accepting grief, the message is really just that if you accept your death, it's possible to accept your grief.